In this Q&A episode, I'll be answering the question, which Hebrew accent should I use while learning Biblical Hebrew? It's especially interesting with the growth of the Hebrew language as it pertains to the amount of speakers of modern Hebrew today. Basically, there's a few accents that we could ascribe to Hebrew, and the easy answer I would suggest is learn what your teacher is teaching you. Your teacher may be trained in a certain tradition, and go ahead and follow that tradition. If you want, do understand that modern Hebrew has a specific accent. If you were to read Hebrew aloud with the modern accent, that would be very normal. That's kind of par for course these days. And what it does, the modern accent is based on Sephardic pronunciation, and it doesn't always pronounce every guttural letter. So it will pronounce chet as chet instead of heth. It will not pronounce the letter ayin very frequently, though many people in Israel, you can hear them pronounce ayin. Others, you don't hear them pronounce this letter at all. In some cases, you don't hear the spirantization of all the Beged Kefet letters. So you won't hear Gimel pronounced as a Ra. You won't hear Dalet pronounced as a The in its spirantized forms. The same could be said for the letter Tau, which would be called Tav, that has a spirantized form Th. Although you do hear it in certain Ashkenaz pronunciations pronounced like an S. In that case, tuchus, the bottom, the underneath side, for example, is from tahat, right? So you hear the spirantized form in the second version rather than the first. Now, the alternative is to pronounce Hebrew, Biblical Hebrew, according to the commonly utilized pronunciation of all of these Semitic characters. You find this basically in Aramaic speakers, also Arabic speakers, with the exception of the letter Pe, which often isn't pronounced in Arabic. The general way that Arabic speakers pronounce the letter Pe is with an F sound, fe. So that's the major difference there. Also, V, the softened form of Beth, is not pronounced in Arabic speakers unless it's, with foreign words or something less common. Now, there are Jewish communities that do liturgically pronounce these letters, or at least this is what I've been instructed by my instructor from Iraq, who's from a Jewish community. And they will read the Hebrew Bible with the pronunciation that sounds more like the common Semitic pronunciation of other Aramaic or Arabic speakers. But that's when they read the Bible, through prayer. When people speak Hebrew, they generally use the modern accent. So this will mean you'll hear Hebrew speakers pronounce the letter resh as resh, a GH sound, rather than the resh, the trilled R. You won't hear the emphatic letters paeth as a T, like fa sound. Instead, you just hear tet, right? Same with salde. You won't hear it as salde, you'll hear it as sade, a TS sound, which is common to modern Hebrew. But in the end, I think it's really a personal decision. If you go around speaking with the Semitic accent, it's much easier for learners to pair that accent with every letter because they all match and fit somehow. But you may come across as really pompous and, like trying to speak in a certain form of English, let's say, where, you're in Britain and you're using the OP pronunciation for the English language, which, maybe only here in Shakespeare, or certain performances of Shakespeare. OP is the old pronunciation. And a lot of people, they may disregard that because when it's spoken these days, it's spoken according to the modern pronunciation. And a lot of professors will have learned from modern speakers. So there's that. The other issue is your professor, especially in some seminaries, I've heard Hebrew pronounced quite interestingly, if I can use that word. So the pronunciation is odd at best. So I think you're better off if you do a modern or a classical Semitic, pronunciation of it. But in the end, look, if you're learning biblical Hebrew, you're probably learning it for reading scripture, and it's more of a reading skill than a speaking skill. It's a speaking skill when it's chanted aloud or when it's prayed actively, right? So it goes from being read just with your eyes, and instead it's read aloud. People don't speak biblical Hebrew, they speak modern Hebrew these days. Okay. So if you're interested in speaking, you want to take your Hebrew to that level, or you want to cross train between classical Hebrew and modern Hebrew, maybe you should learn the modern accent. That's probably better for you. And I notice that when I read Hebrew, I do it with the classical accent in certain contexts, but when I start to pick up the speed and read it, I default to a modern accent because that's how people speak. People speak, modern Hebrew a certain way. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the matter. In the end, go with your teacher, but think about what your goals might be for learning Hebrew and what's going to help you learn the best. Those are my suggestions. Well, I hope that answered your inquiry. So definitely enjoy your studies of biblical Hebrew, and thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. Go ahead. If you have a follow-up question, post it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you.